Bernie Sanders doubles down on his support for the literacy program the Castro regime implemented. We'll get into that. The rise of open authoritarianism in the Democratic Party. What does this mean for the Democratic primary? There is a debate tonight among Democrats. It's going to help determine who wins in South Carolina, and a whole lot more coming up.
To the Democrats who say, you don't say good things about Fidel Castro. He destroyed freedoms in that country. He picked winners and losers and killed them and put them in prison forever. You don't give him a pat on the back for anything.
You don't give, it's not a question. Truth is truth. All right? Now, if you want to disagree with me, if somebody wants to say that, and by the way, all of those Congress people that you mentioned just so happen to be supporting other candidates, just accidentally, no doubt, coincidentally. But, you know, the truth is the truth. And that's what happened in the first years of the Castro regime.
Truth is the answer you get from Bernie Sanders there. Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. You would think that Bernie Sanders might take the off-ramp here that CNN was clearly providing him, right? That he could walk away from his comments about the literacy program. By the way, the literacy of the Cuban people went from somewhere in the mid-70 percentile range to like maybe 90%. And that was at the cost of the enslavement of the entire island, the appropriation of not just rich people, but middle-class people's property, indoctrination programs, mass detention, mass executions, torture, brutalization, and, oh yes, huge numbers of people risking death. As a Cuban immigrant to this country, now a proud American, had explained it to me, always remember that people were not just willing to risk their own lives, but fathers, mothers were willing to get on rickety rafts, homemade rafts, and risk the possibility of watching their children drown before them or their children get eaten by sharks. That's how desperate they were to get off of this island that Bernie Sanders thinks had a great literacy program. Now, we're not overstating this. This is no longer that point in conservative media where you say, come on, is this meant to just get a rise out of people, or is there a little bit of media exaggeration going on here? We have a socialist who is now on a glide path to becoming the Democrat nominee for the presidency. And not only does he not hide the fact that he's a socialist, he's quite open about it, obviously, but he won't even repudiate his previous warm comments about some of the most awful totalitarian regimes on the planet. And this guy wants to be in charge of the executive branch of the United States government in less than a year. I think it's a big deal. I think we can all view this as something that is worthy of our attention and our time. And just remember this, as scary as it is, the Democrat corporate media, the CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post industrial complex, they'll find some way to push Sanders on us. They don't care. Anybody but Trump. Anyone who they think will give them some of what they want, even if it means a complete abandonment of some of the core principles of this country for now, well, really since the beginning. I mean, if you look at individual rights and constitutional restraint on government, and then you look at what the Sanders administration is already proposing to do, it's effectively at war with the founding principles of this country. It wants to turn us into that's right, kind of like what Obama said, fundamentally transform the country. That was his promise, and now Sanders looks to finish that process. This is troubling to say the least. It's something that we should take very seriously. We have to take it very seriously. Bernie Sanders also takes all the wrong lessons from history and from other models around the world, all of the wrong models. He somehow has managed to spend his entire adult life distilling the incorrect lessons of state control, authoritarianism, intervention by government authorities into markets, all the wrong lessons. That's really his magic power, is to always, he's like Joe Biden on foreign policy, to always get it wrong. Bernie Sanders on the market and on what creates wealth and prosperity for all people always gets it wrong. All he knows how to do is class warfare agitation. He doesn't even know how to implement that class warfare agitation. You have to remember that. He hasn't even had experience at the controls. He's just the loud voice on the corner yelling about millionaires and billionaires and oligarchs. And you're going to have free this and free that, and they're all going to be paid for by the rich. Except we know everyone's going to pay for it. There aren't enough rich people to pay for the things that Bernie Sanders says that he wants. I've had a number of jobs in the private sector, and the people that I have worked for, or at least the owners of the companies I've worked for, they have been wealthy. I've never had a job that Bernie Sanders would offer me, right? I've never worked for somebody who Bernie Sanders would be able to do anything other than extract from. So his demonization of the people that are actual job creators is counterproductive in the most clear and the most evident ways. He simply does not care, though. He's going to continue with this. And he also knows that he has to bow to the wokeness of the left, which I suppose is unsurprising. Here's what he says about who his vice president, for example, will be. Play clip 10.
But your question is about a vice presidential part of the ticket. And yes, the answer is we will do that, but it's a little bit presumptuous right now. I will tell you one thing, though, is that person will not be an old white guy. That I can say definitively. Right? This, in all seriousness, that our cabinet and our administration will very intentionally look like America. I think it's important that all of our people see themselves reflected in the administration of the President of the United States, and we will absolutely do that.
This from a guy who is really the oldest of white guys running for the presidency from what is, I believe, the whitest single state in the United States. But now he's Mr. Diversity because he thinks he has to be in the Democratic primary. So the media can go along with all this and look like they're not selling out whatever principles they pretend to have. How's he going to pay for all this? We'll figure it out. I mean, this has really become a common talking point on the left. How are you going to pay for $100 trillion? It'll come from somewhere. Keep in mind, right now, people might have to consider the possibility that we are facing because of manufacturing stoppages and supply chain shortages, a change in global GDP as a result of coronavirus. That's a real concern. I don't know if it will happen, but that's a real concern. And you also have $23 trillion or so of U.S. debt already piled up. There are economic ramifications that are happening all the time from that. And Bernie Sanders is just saying, let's just make it $100 trillion. I mean, he is walking into a room full of flammable material, and he's got a flamethrower in his hands, and he's just saying what could go wrong. This is really something that we all have to take very seriously. I did not think if Joe Biden became president, you weren't going to have the massive destruction of wealth that you would have under a Sanders presidency. Let's understand this. I mean, Biden would have, he would have done some bad Democrat things, and it certainly wouldn't have been as good as Trump, nowhere near it. But, he'd sort of go with what the corporate interests and the Democrat donor class wants on some things. Bernie Sanders, it's not clear that the corporate donor class can control him at all. And it's also not clear that he even really understands the ramifications of what he says he wants to do. He's claiming, for example, that we'll just figure out how to pay for things when we decide that we're going to pay for them. Play 12, Mark.
There is a lot of detail in here. You can look for it for yourselves on the website. It is not matching the price tag that some put at about $30 trillion for the Medicare for All transition. You do have lots of different ideas in here. I'm not saying you don't. But you get about halfway there. No. The question becomes, how do you get the rest of the way?
Well, we get there. There was a study, Chris. I don't know if you happen to see it. I don't know if anyone...
$30 trillion over 10 years.
How do you get there? The math doesn't add up. He can pretend that it adds up as much as he wants to. I mean, Bernie Sanders, in a saner era where the left has not had the ability to organize and galvanize via digital and social media, and where the corporate media hasn't just become a bunch of absolutely spineless cowards who just don't want to be called, don't want to be called racist, don't want to be called sexist, and will play along with this class warfare game. I mean, that's the funniest thing about the CNN and MSNBC and ABC, same deal, that these networks have all these people that go on TV who are multi-millionaires getting paid to do a job that 1,000 other people could replace them in tomorrow and do just as good of a job. But they're friends with the right people and they like their little privileged positions, and they act like Bernie Sanders is not crazy because their audience, or a substantial portion of their audience now, wants to believe that. So they'll just play along. I thought journalists are supposed to speak truth to power. I thought, especially if you're a super rich journalist who's been in the game a long time, shouldn't he be willing to take a stand? Why haven't you seen a single anchor at CNN who's going to come out and speak, look, Bernie Sanders is a commie and he's going to destroy the U.S. economy? We all know that. They won't say it. They're cowards. They're cowards. What do they risk? Oh, their ratings won't be as high. Oh, maybe they won't get invited to the fanciest parties in the Hamptons this summer. People are the worst. They really are. I mean, at least the trolls that work at some of these other, the salon.com and some of these other places, Slate, all these writers living in Brooklyn who think that they're changing the world by being snarky idiots all day long. At least you could say for them, they gotta keep the hustle going so they can pay the bills. But some of these people you see in the big 3-letter news agency and corporate media, they got no excuse. There's no reason for them to be such wimps, except that they like their privileged positions and they won't speak the truth. Not only to the American people, forget that, they will not speak the truth to their Democrat audience. There have been all these editorials about how journalism in the era of Trump means taking oppositional positions. They really write this. This has been a common theme. Oppositional positions to Donald Trump, because that's what truth is. To be true, you must be opposed to Trump. Well, I'm sorry, but if you are any of the mainstream journo darlings out there, and you don't know that Bernie Sanders would wreck the U.S. economy, you're a moron. But what's worse is I think most of them recognize it, but they're too cowardly, they're too wimpy to possibly alienate some of their audience by saying now, look, say what you will about conservatism. There are a lot of people that were willing to speak out incorrectly, it turned out, about Donald Trump, but during the primary, they said their piece. These Democrats, these big journos, they're just going along for the ride, man. They're just like, okay. Maybe it's going to be Sanders. We know they're all activists. So what I'm trying to say is that they are accessories. They are accomplices in the socialism surge that the Democratic Party is going through right now. They could do something to try to slow it down, but they won't. So just remember that. They've been pretending for years that they're so concerned about authoritarianism, they're so concerned about an overly powerful executive branch official. And Bernie Sanders is walking around saying, I'm going to take your money, I'm going to make you do things, I'm going to be in charge of everything, and it's just going to be executive order. Where's the outrage? Where's it? No, instead they give him the Chris Cuomo, come on, hey, it's bro Cuomo, come on. I mean, you're not really going to be, you're not really going to be like doing the thing you said you're going to do about the thing, right? I mean, come on. You don't really think they're like, Cuba, Castro. I mean, come on, right? I mean, it's not great. Just tell us it's not great and we can talk about how great you are. He's like, nope. Literacy program equals good. Truth is truth. This is who you're up against. He's a radical. And keep in mind, I mean, I'm not trying to say this in a way that's, ungallant or anything, but I mean, Bernie Sanders feels like he's got nothing to lose. Remember this. I mean, he either wins this race and is in a position to fundamentally transform America, or he gets to go down fighting. I mean, Bernie Sanders is not planning to have what I'm saying here is he's not going to have another 20 years of political career. So he's a guy who thinks he's playing with house money, your money.
I happen to believe in democracy, not authoritarianism. But, you can't say China is another example. All right. China is an authoritarian country, becoming more and more authoritarian. But can anyone deny? I mean, the facts are clear that they have taken more people out of extreme poverty than any country in history.
Oh, boy. This is what I mean. He doesn't even know the basics. How has China been able to do that? Was Mao able to do that? I mean, Mao was a communist. He was a collectivist, a socialist. And 40 to 60 million people starved because of his great ideas. Great leap forward. 40 to 60 million people. Atrocities so horrific because hunger became weaponized as a tool of state control during that period of the Great Famine. And what Bernie Sanders takes from the lesson of China is not, wait a second, the Chinese authoritarian regime said, let's actually introduce free market reforms and have state-sponsored capitalism, which is what China is engaged in, right? State control of free market-based activity. I mean, the Chinese government is trying to allow people to run big companies, sell their stuff on the global market so that there is wealth. The wealth creation mechanism is the market. This is what Bernie Sanders doesn't understand. The Chinese government wasn't able to lift people out of poverty by instituting a higher tax rate. That's not how it worked. Or by promising free health care for everybody. That's not how it worked. So he doesn't even, in these models that he brings up, he doesn't even, and by the way, we always get into this thing of, okay, you know, there's the USSR, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, and then those are the really, really bad socialist countries. And then you look at what happened in, or the left, the Bernie Sanders folks will bring up Denmark and Sweden, and which are not socialist countries, but they have some socialist sectors in the countries, and they have a large welfare state and high taxation, even though they are free market economies. What about, I mean, you go down the list of all the other socialist experiments, socialist countries, all throughout Africa and Latin America, and all disasters. All of them are disasters. Economically, basket cases across the board. Dozens and dozens of them. Ones you don't even think about. Who sits around thinking about, like, how did socialism work out in Albania? Pretty badly. Ask an Albanian. You know, I mean, there are all these places where we've run the experiment. It's a bad idea. And not only is it a bad idea, Sanders doesn't understand the places where it was run poorly, and then they started to make things better, why things got better.
So what we are calling for is universal child care.
How are you going to pay for this?
We have a tax on wealth to pay for that.
For all the people who like the idea of it, there are going to be a lot of Democrats again who are saying, well, wait a minute, yet again, this is another program that it's not clear how it's going to get paid for.
No,
it's just going to add to...
It is clear how it's going to be paid for. Look, Anderson...
It's just more taxes.
It's taxes on billionaires, you know? You know, I get a little bit tired of hearing my opponents saying, gee, how are you going to pay for a program that impacts and helps children or working class families or middle class families? How are you going to pay for that? And yet, where are people saying, how are you going to pay for over $750 billion on military spending? How are you going to pay for $1 trillion in tax breaks to the 1% in large corporations, which was what Trump did? When you help the billionaires and you help Wall Street, hey, of course we can pay for it. That's what America's supposed to be about. Well, I disagree.
All demagoguery. I mean, just all blather. That's what this guy is. He's a blather machine. I mean, by the way, don't even get me started on if we had to sit down and I tried to, this guy wants to be commander-in-chief. And Democrats, they were so upset that Trump wasn't the genius scholar that they pretended Obama was. Do we really think that Bernie Sanders could have an intelligent discussion about, I don't know, why did we win the Cold War, Bernie Sanders? Why did the Soviet Union fail? Somebody should ask Bernie Sanders. If we had a real press corps, which we don't. We have activist Democrats who, just like they've taken over universities and faculty lounges at colleges across the country, they've also completely turned journalism into a province of the left, which is why they hate talk radio so much, because it was a format where audience got to determine what they were listening to, not a bunch of corporate executives who, with FCC assistance, are able to determine who gets airtime where and, what cable channels exist. Who thinks that Bernie Sanders would be able to explain what went wrong in Venezuela? I mean, he would just say things like, there was corruption and, they didn't do a good job. And okay, but why didn't it work? I'm telling you, he could not explain. He couldn't even begin to explain it. What's scary here is that Bernie Sanders isn't even a smart socialist. This is what I really feel like I have to say to you. There are very clever socialists. In fact, for most of his adult life and probably close to up until the end, Christopher Hitchens was one of my favorite writers, even though he's a rabid atheist and unfair to the Catholic Church. And there was a lot of stuff that I didn't agree with him on. But in terms of writing talent, the guy was exceptional. He was really good at the craft of writing and was also very engaging at argument and would argue with whomever wanted to argue with him. And he wasn't, these other people, these CNN anchors and the MSNBC talking heads, these people are cowards. They never actually put themselves in a position to have a real argument. But Hitchens was a socialist. He's a very smart one, though. So he would explain to you why, and he would consider himself a Trotskyite, which I don't even know how much Bernie Sanders could explain to you about the difference between, let's say, Trotsky versus being a Leninist and the split there and what happened, although that is probably his favorite part of history, so maybe he does know a bit about it. And does Bernie Sanders, is he somebody who could speak about what's in Das Kapital? I'm not even sure what I'm saying to you that Bernie Sanders understands the foundation of the ideology that he is now the single most powerful representative of in the United States, and with that, in a sense, among the most powerful socialists in the world. He is representing a resurgence of this ideology. And I think that we're in the midst of this resurgence in part because of the great success of the opponents of socialism, the capitalist impulse that has been on display in this country for, well, depending on how you want to define it, let's just say in the post-World War II era, because socialism was ascendant during the Great Depression. That was when all of a sudden the storyline, and journalists were favorable to it, by the way, and I mean the most elite journalists in the country. Lots of journalists thought that the Soviet Union had figured all this out. They bought into the propaganda. The same dumbasses who write for the biggest newspapers and are on the biggest cable news shows in the country today who think that Jussie Smollett was telling the truth, or they did think that. You go back to Walter Duranty, you go back to the famine in Ukraine, and nope, nothing going on there. They either lied or believed the propaganda about there not being a famine in, I think it was 1934 to 1935. The Ukrainians call it the Holodomor, and it was another weaponized famine. Talk about state control and forced deprivation and desperation. Sanders is not even a clever socialist. He's a pure demagogue. The same way that Joe Biden has been just repeating almost like a robot whatever he thinks he has to say at any point in time to have the greatest appeal to voters. In that sense, he's a pure cynical politician. And that's Biden's whole career. What do I have to say to keep getting elected in the state of Delaware? What do I have to say to be in the good graces of the Democratic Party? That's what I will say. I mean, the man doesn't seem to stand for anything other than Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders is, what do I have to say that will appeal to the class warfare instincts and the underlying socialist impulse that has always existed in America, but now is ascendant. I was saying before it was ascendant after the Great Depression because there was a sense that the narrative, the storyline was that capitalism has failed, and that's why the Great Depression happened. The capitalism was a failure, and we were going to enter a new phase. And they looked around, they saw all the desperation, and figured, well, the government must be able to save us. So they wanted to turn to government, and the Soviet Union was pretending that things are much better there than it was. Okay. Now we're in a different position where capitalism has created so much abundance. We are so blessed in this country right now. We are so full of the riches and the wages of a free market system that rewards individual ingenuity and hard work and dedication. And yes, luck, to be sure. All good things in life require some degree of luck. But we have a system where we walk around now with greater ability to communicate, to buy things, to have our health taken care of. I mean, food is orders of magnitude better. And I mean, everywhere you go, food is better than it was even when I was a kid. The stuff we eat is better. You walk into a grocery store anywhere in America, And the variety and abundance and quality is mind-blowing, especially compared to what you would have seen not 100 years ago, but circa 1990 in Moscow. You go online, you'll see photos of it. There's like one type of pickled beet in one kind of can, and then a lot of empty shelves. I mean, that's what, and maybe some powdered milk that you're not sure if it's been around since Khrushchev was in office. I mean, that's what people were dealing with there. What was the difference? That we didn't have enough socialism? Is that why we have so much more? We didn't have enough socialism, or is that socialism was a bad idea? Everybody should be very concerned about this. But the Democrats, you see, they're so obsessed with power and they're so deluded in their Trump hatred that they'll go along with this. They'll go along with it if they have to. A lot of the Democrat establishment is still hoping that there'll be some late surge from Biden. We'll get into Biden in a second. I really mean Biden he's not up for this. He's not up for it. They can keep pretending, but it is now clear the campaign is a crucible. I mean, the campaign is an obstacle course for physical and mental endurance for the people that want to be the next commander-in-chief and chief executive of the United States government. And Biden is falling into the mud pit and wallowing around and not going to make it to the end. And everybody who's being honest sees it. But there's this situation right now. Whoa, is it going to be Bernie Sanders? Really? It's going to be Sanders, huh? He talked about childcare there. Who else had? And by the way, this is not an unfair comparison, because I want to tell you what I think the real goal should be. The real goal of the U.S. economy should be something that even Elizabeth Warren wrote about years and years ago, which was the two-parent income trap. The two-parent income trap is something that means you have two parents that feel like they have to go out of the workplace now. It's too difficult because there has been, I know there are problems. I know this is not perfect. I did not get an advanced degree because it was too expensive. I got into fantastic places. Couldn't have gotten a master's degree, would have been great. Actually, all kinds of different master's programs. I thought about getting a security studies master's at one point, too, and I basically could have walked from the CIA to any program I wanted. But the point is, I didn't do it because it was too expensive. Healthcare, housing where there are jobs, and education have become too expensive. These are also some of the most regulated, government-intensive sectors of the economy. Somehow, we have government backing student loans, and now college gets more and more and more expensive. These universities are just fattening themselves up. I mean, they're bloated with multi-billion-dollar endowments. It's beyond belief what's going on. And healthcare is supposed to get better and cheaper for us. And really, a lot of healthcare, all you see is it's getting more expensive and less access. More expensive and less access. Because they keep intruding on the market mechanisms the same thing that makes your iPhone a supercomputer that would have more power to do computation than every computer put together in the NATO alliance, circa 1960. Your iPhone has more in it than all of the countries of NATO combined in, 50 years ago. That same mechanism of the free market, we suppress that when it comes to healthcare. We don't want that to happen. We don't think that anybody can come up with better ways to cure people, to treat people, if there was a financial incentive for them. No, we'd rather keep pushing down. The healthcare companies are making too much money. The pharmaceutical companies are making too much money. Well, pharmaceutical companies, the people that go to work for them, they could do something else too. But I want to bring you back to this daycare that Bernie Sanders is promising for everybody, because this is important. So I mentioned to you the daycare proposal from Bernie Sanders, and what we really should want in this country is the ability for a person who is has what we consider a middle class job to be able to live in a metro area where there are jobs, because that's now where the greatest concentration of new jobs tends to happen, not in the city necessarily, but around the city, and be able to support a family on one salary. That would be, because we fight against this now, and I'm probably going to start introducing some of the Marxist attacks on the family, because the Marxists have always believed in separating the family, because the family stands in place of the ultimate goal of a true socialist, a true Marxist, which is not just radical equality when you're talking about economics, but a radical equality of all individuals without familial ties interfering with the relationship with the state. The true socialists believe in the state in place of God. This is at the heart of socialist philosophy. We want a society in this country where people are able to raise their own children, where you don't have to have two parents going to work. And then there's also this other issue of single parenthood in this country, and how I know that things happen and people make mistakes or things, go against them, but single parenthood has been glorified in this country, and the realities of it based on the numbers. Now, that doesn't mean any individual case is good or bad, but based on the numbers, single parenthood is very difficult for the long-term prospects for children. And it's irrefutable. More likely to have a substance abuse problem, the kids. More likely to go to prison. Less likely to finish high school. Every metric. Less income. So you get into, okay, well, but also, if you're in a single parent household, or rather, if Bernie Sanders is advocating for this, you're going to have situations now where people are spending even less time. Now no parent will be spending most of the day with the child. It'll be the state. This is a story from the New York Times back in 1974. In the Soviet Union, daycare is the norm. Zoya Idenko is the model of the young Soviet mother liberated by a local daycare center that permits her to hold a job. With her 3-year-old son in a state nursery, she works as a guide for in-tourists and sometimes also teaches English at night school. Under the highly subsidized Soviet daycare system, Mrs. Idenko pays a modest $13 a month, about 1/10 of her pay, for 6 days a week of childcare. She drops her boy off at 8 a.m. and picks him up at 7 p.m. He gets 3 meals and a snack daily. Child-rearing never had much attraction for Mrs. Idenko. It goes on even more. Here she actually throws some shade at America. Quote, "Don't American women want to get out of the house?" she asked. "Don't you want to work? Don't you want to earn money and get some independence?" But privately, many educated Soviet mothers take a much more skeptical view of the Soviet daycare system and regard the competence of most daycare workers as below desirable standards. You don't say. The Soviets, who had glass factories that only made broken glass. I'm sure they did a great job educating your kid and taking care of him or her and making sure that child felt loved and supported and was getting all the developmental needs they had met. I'm sure they weren't dropped off in austere, cinder block, Soviet-style buildings with a bunch of bureaucrats who could care less about anything going on with these kids and felt like as long as they made their way, as long as at the end of the day no kids left the classroom, in a tiny body bag, they'd pretty much done their deal for the day. Good job. Good job, Soviet Union. But notice the trend. People have been let, we see this deterioration of the family and in intact family units. It is, you can read about this. All the honest social scientists will tell you intact families are critical for the development of a child. You want to spend time with your children. And I'm not even getting into the paying for this. I'm getting into, we really think that everyone should drop off their 1-year-old at state daycare? That's now going to be, what about family members, grandparents, uncles, cousins, whatever it is? People that are invested in the child. The state is not invested in anything other than taking your money and indoctrinating your children. The same way that adults make a huge error when they think that the state wants to hold them close and keep them safe and warm at night. The same wrong thinking applies when you're talking about dropping off your children in this state daycare program. Where, by the way, if you don't like the state daycare program near you, what do you think happens then? Oh, you're going to go complain to somebody? Yeah, good luck with that. I'm sure the local daycare commissar under the Sanders administration is really going to care what you think about the fact that the people in charge could give a crap about your children. They just want to get paid with your tax dollars.